Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll ask all of you to take your seats, please. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to acknowledge the Most Honorable Mia Moore-Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mr. Ilan Goldfajn, the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, Ms. Ragnheiður Elín Árnadóttir, the Director of the OECD Development Centre, the Honorable Ryan Straughn, Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment for Barbados, the Honorable Chad Blackman, the Minister of Economic Affairs and Investment for Barbados, and we have joining us remotely Mathias Cormann, the Secretary General of the OECD. We also warmly want to welcome the representatives from the development agencies, the diplomatic missions, and our partner institutions that are joining us this afternoon. On behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank, the country representative for IDB Barbados, Karina Cockburn, and the OECD Development Centre, the Government of Barbados, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our official launch of the Caribbean Development Dynamics 2025 report. We have an insightful agenda ahead, beginning with welcome remarks from distinguished leaders in the development sphere. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Mr. Ilan Goldfajn, the President of the Inter-American Development Bank.
So good morning. It's so nice to see you all again. Ministers, thank you for again hosting us. We have had several meetings here, so you've been so kind with your time and hosting us in such important. I would like to thank also the OECD, our partners, director, also Mathias from that will join us virtually. So, and all of you that are joining the OECD, the Government of Barbados, us, all your distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be here because we are launching the Caribbean Development Dynamics report. And I think it's an important report because the Caribbean holds immense promise. It has the biodiversity, it creates unparalleled opportunities in the blue economy. We have renewable energy, we have nature-based solutions, we have all the potential and the skills of its people. But the region also faces challenges: climate vulnerability, connectivity gaps that we need to address, the financing, the limitations of the financing that we also try to help. So this study, the Caribbean Development Dynamics, that focuses on 6 areas: resilience, inclusion, growth, governance, resource mobilization, and regional collaboration. So those are challenges, but those are also opportunities. When we think about resilience, we need to think about building stronger foundations. You know more than I do that the Caribbean is one of the most climate vulnerable regions globally, with disasters costing more than 2% of GDP annually. Of course, each country by itself can have a shock and have much more than that, but on average, it costs 2 to 3% of GDP, which is a lot. So when we talk about resilience, we need to think about we need to focus on infrastructure. We need to focus on early warning systems. We need to focus on harnessing biodiversity for nature-based climate adaptation. And as you know, we have been working, for example, we announced yesterday our project on water. And water, having water is resilience. And we're using the first debt for resilience swap in the world to finance it. So that's very important. But of course, as several of you have reminded us, and also Prime Minister Mia Mottley, resilience, climate resilience is very linked to social resilience. So the second part is social inclusion, because you have inequities. 25% of the population lives in poverty, 37% face food insecurity. So we need to reduce the informality in the labor market. We need to enhance social protection systems that the IDB has developed over the years with the countries. The countries have developed, but we have helped them develop. And we need to empower women, youth, growth. If you want to have social resilience, if you want to have climate resilience, we better find ways to grow. So the region is limited, is still by low productivity, 46% of the OECD level. So the OECD has an average, is 46% less than half. And it relies on tourism, commodities, nothing wrong with that, but can we also increase productivity in other areas? So we need to diversify to areas like the blue economy that we're already doing, renewable energy that we're also trying to help in that regard, and of course, digital transformation. To do that, you need governance. You need to strengthen trust and public services. And not differently from other places in the world, there is still a gap in terms of satisfaction of the public with the services. Only 40% of Caribbean citizens are satisfied, for example, with the health services. So we need to strengthen institutions. We need to look at evidence-based policymaking, which means that we need data. We need to have the citizens engaged in order to rebuild credibility and trust. So, institutions. Well, so we need governance, institutions, we need social protection, we need social resilience, we need climate resilience. We do need growth, but to do that, we need resources. And these are the resources for the region. So tax revenues in the Caribbean are below regional and global average. Regional here is, from our point of view, is Latin America and the Caribbean. So it stands at 21%, even lower than Latin America, which is 22.4%, and clearly lower than the 34% of the OECD. So you need more resources, and to do that, you need to strengthen tax systems. Tax collection, direct, needs to be progressive because we care about inequalities. So we need to finance development with more resources. And we need to do innovative financial instruments. Green, blue, sustainability-linked bonds, we need to do it. But the Caribbean is doing it. And it's funny that I'm saying it in Barbados because we just did the first debt for climate for the blue economy. I just mentioned the resilience debt swap for water, and we are thinking about the debt for social. So we are innovating clauses, catastrophe clauses. We are working on that. Our loans also have catastrophe clauses. We can do better than that. We want to give more of an impact on the clauses, but we are doing it. So yes, financial innovation will help us mobilize resources. More tax revenues also will help us finance development. One point that is quite important for us is regional collaboration. The study talks about it. The study notes that the region can benefit from deeper integration in transport, trade, digital connectivity, reducing costs and boosting economic collaboration. Well, the IDB has been working on that. You may have heard about the One Caribbean, very important initiative that came from our governors, which are the ministers, and the ministers are the countries. So we are here in the countries. We use our convening effort. We bring them together. They create the priorities: resilience, citizen security, food security. Those are 3 of the pillars. We're going to work together. We want to bundle together with other organizations, CDB. Why not the World Bank, the OECD, European Union? We need to collaborate such that we provide a better way to deal with the country. The countries cannot deal with each of us separately. So the countries need to collaborate in a regional, let's do the One Caribbean, but we also, the organization, need to collaborate to come together so that we can facilitate what we're doing. So let me close saying that the last thing that we need to look, in addition to citizen security, food security, resilience, is foster the private sector. Because if we want to have growth, if we want to have all of that, and productivity, we need to bring also the private sector. And this is where we have been pushing quite hard at the IDB. The IDB has just approved in our annual meeting in March a very important capitalization that will basically double the size of our private sector arm, the IDB Invest. And we managed to replenish the IDB Lab, which is the lab that does the startups and venture capital and innovation. So with the 2 of them, the size of the private sector involved in IDB, which is around 44-45%, will be much larger. And that means that we can afford to help the private sector boost productivity and growth. And just yesterday, we had the Foreign Ministry, Lamy, from the UK. And he gave quite good news here for the Caribbean on resources that he will provide directly to the Caribbean, but also resources through us, for our One Caribbean, and compete. But importantly, they want to have up to 5 times their shares at the IDB Invest. And that means that they can go up to $100 million in shares of the IDB Invest. So we are actually getting momentum here in the Caribbean because we all care about the Caribbean. And this study shows how we are working on that. So thank you very much for all of you. And thank you very much for our partners in the study.
Thank you, President Goldfajn. I'm also mindful that the President has to leave shortly, so I will also respectfully ask him if you have to leave at your 2:30 time. Yes. Our next speaker is Ms. Ragnheiður Elín Árnadóttir, the Director of OECD Development Centre, who will deliver remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dear Ilan, I hope I'm from Iceland. We all go by first name, so I hope you don't mind me calling you Ilan. And my good friend Ryan. We are on a very especially good first name basis since Barbados is the newest member of the Development Centre as of this week. So it is a great pleasure. Thank you. It is such a great pleasure to be here. Minister Blackman, thank you for joining us as well. Dear ambassadors, distinguished panelists, I'm looking forward to the discussions after, colleagues and guests. It is such a pleasure. Oh, I forgot my sorry, Minister. We have shared panels or events before as well. It is such a great pleasure to be here in Bridgetown to launch the very first edition of the Caribbean Development Dynamics, a report that has been not so long in the making since we started, but has been in our minds to be developed for a long time. So we are very happy to be here and see the product come alive. And I could second everything that the president of IDB said in his opening remarks, especially the need for partnership and that the countries need to get together, and the international organizations and institutions, we need to do the same thing. So I would like to tell you that the OECD Development Centre is very much with you on that one. And as I said, Barbados is now the second country, Caribbean country, to be a member of the OECD Development Centre, which now gathers 56 countries. And what we do, what is our DNA, is to promote dialogue, to promote peer learning between countries of all income levels on equal footing. So that is our main mantra. So we gather countries from all regions of the world to promote dialogue and address the global issues together. And I also want to, and I will say that to the Prime Minister when she arrives, to express my deep gratitude to Prime Minister Mia Mottley and of course Minister Straughn and Minister Blackman for their trust and support in all of this. And this report emerges also from a very fruitful and growing partnership with the IDB. We have in recent years become increasingly convinced that to truly understand the Caribbean development, we need to focus our analysis and policy dialogue to understand the region's unique features. We have been producing the Latin American Economic Outlook for the LAC region for many years. But we have heard from our members, both from the Latin America and the Caribbean side of LAC, that we need to do a more deep dive into the Caribbean region, and this is our response to that. We have now a report that is entirely dedicated to the region's specific challenges and untapped opportunities, as the President mentioned in his remarks. It is a new tool that will help policymakers improve the lives of people in the Caribbean. And I want to emphasize again the importance of the partnership. But what is it that is new with this report? I want to share 3 features, and then we will have a deeper dive into the report here later in the discussion. First feature is that the CDD, as we call the Caribbean Development Dynamics, takes a multidimensional approach. It examines the full spectrum of policy issues, from the socioeconomic and environmental challenges to institutional and financial priorities. And it explores the link between policies that are often, and too often, treated in isolation. Secondly, the CDD offers robust comparative data. And the President mentioned that we need data, we need evidence to be able to make the best policy decisions that are possible. Policymakers in the Caribbean can compare their countries, not only with countries in the region itself, but also with peers in Latin America, in the CIDS countries, and to OECD averages as well. And a third reason to engage with the CDD is that it's more than a report. And we have high ambitions for that. We want it to become a platform for dialogue and conversation. We want to use it to build a community. We want to bring together the stakeholders to share ideas, collaborate, and find solutions for the region. And this is what we have done at the Development Centre with our other three regional flagship reports. We tell a story. We have a regional overview, but then we also have a thematic section that is decided upon with the partners in the region of topics that are of high interest in the regions and of high importance. So there we build on, we tell the story, and as I said, we want this to become a platform for dialogue. In just a few moments, the Secretary General of the OECD, Mathias Cormann, will share his high-level takeaways from the report, and later my colleagues who are here with us, Sebastián Nieto and Juan Vázquez, who I want to personally thank for their drive and great work on this with the IDB partners. They will share the deeper analysis of the report. My own takeaway, just to sum up, is that I think that the Caribbean is brimming with potential, untapped potential. The region is rich in biodiversity and natural resources. The President mentioned the blue economy. Being from an island myself, from Iceland, the blue economy is a topic that I find very important, and I'm always happy to read and talk about the blue economy. But this report also talks about innovative green financing, where the Caribbean countries are, in fact, leading the way. For example, with innovative bonds or debt for nature conversions. And Barbados, of course, provides a standout example. As you are well aware here, it launched just last week a Debt for Climate Resilience conversation with support from the IDB and the European Union through the European Investment Bank. So, in closing, again, I just want to thank you for joining us here today. As I said, it's the beginning of a story. It's shining a light on a region that is, as we have said, full of opportunities, but challenges as well, and we will tackle them together with and make decisions based on evidence and help us all advance. We cannot stress our thanks, and I am very pleased to give the floor next to the Minister. I'm sorry, I'm taking over from the moderator, but I know you're next on the list, and I look forward to listening to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Árnadóttir. And as you said, welcome to Honorable Ryan Straughn, the Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados.
Good afternoon. I acknowledge that Ilan had to depart for the airport. Colleagues, Raga, welcome to Barbados. It would be remiss of me not to be very clear from the outset that the IDB has been a strong partner with Barbados in relation to addressing issues of climate long before climate became a hot topic. And we have been engaging substantively, I believe, over the course of the last 6 years in trying to find innovative solutions. I know that we have, over the course of certainly the last two, in working, and I acknowledge the EU ambassador working with the EU alongside the IDB in crafting a solution that we believe is the right solution with respect to addressing our water management issues. And outside of the actual innovation of itself financially, I think over the course of the next 15 to 20 years, the implementation of that particular project is going to have a very transformational impact on Barbados. And we hope that it can serve as an example for how other small states can also work collaboratively with partners to figure out how to respond to the needs of people more urgently. And therefore, we hope that whilst it took us 2 years to execute, that the next one shouldn't take 2 years for whoever will come after. And I think that the learnings that we've been able to garner over this 2 years, I think is important for other multilaterals to be able to support. And as I said on Monday in Paris when we were at the center, I believe the OECD Development Centre can play a clearinghouse, if you like, with respect to ensuring that the things that are being done country by country by country is shared with partners, such that we agree the standard to which we will all meet, and therefore feel comfortable that when we engage, we are engaging with good data, clear policy, and that the partners that we bring to the table understand why it's important that these interventions are done in a timely manner. I think what is critical coming out of not just the report, but we have acknowledged along the way, is that without scale, there really cannot be any transformation. And therefore, pool investment across the region, pool procurement, but more importantly, access to technologies from our partners, especially for small states, is going to be important to allow us to build resilience. And therefore, the report speaks to unlocking the Caribbean's potential. And I think if we understand the importance of working together, and as the Prime Minister will say, if you have the coalition of the willing, you will go with who is ready first, and then those who will see the example being set will follow, and therefore we have the best example, but certainly opportunity to be able to bring, I think, substantive transformation to the lives of ordinary people in the Caribbean. So I really thank the Centre and the IDB for sharing this very important report with us, because as I reviewed it, it reminded me of much of what we were doing in the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, because every policy is connected in some form or fashion with either the SDGs or the climate agenda, and therefore okay. The institutional capacity that is required for an institution like the Barbados Water Authority in managing the water resources of a country, but understanding its link and its importance to food security and investment more generally across the country. And I think we have been able to set in motion a series of actions and commitments, really, commitments that I believe is going to help transform not just Barbados, but certainly transform the region. And therefore, with the partners and the partnerships that we've been able to foster in this effort, I think it is going to be very, very, very important and instructive, the learnings that will come from this, and our ability then to scale up and to do more with other countries in the region. I think these templates, if you like, these templates will be significant as part of that. Now, we have, over the course of these last 6 years, 6 months I'm counting, been engaging more substantively with all of our partners. And given that we've established our climate investment plan as a matter of focus, we don't see the climate plan as separate from achieving the SDGs. We don't see it as separate from achieving growth. We believe it is central, the interventions with respect to what we need to do now in order to ensure that Barbados in 25 years, 50 years, is here, along with the rest of the region, contributing to solutions globally. And therefore, the innovations that we've been able to work through with our partners here, right from Bridgetown, again, serves as an example as to what can be achieved globally. And therefore, with the help of the Development Centre, the European Union and the other strategic partners, I think we can not just achieve scale from a financing perspective, but with the right access to technologies in a timely manner, this region can indeed be transformed. And so the report itself, whilst you may read it sequentially, it really encapsulates a lot of the things that are extremely cross-cutting, that requires us now to step back and look at it from a big picture perspective. And each of us will have a puzzle piece to put on the table, whether you're the IDB, whether you're the OECD Centre, whether you're the EU, Canada, whoever in the room, there's a piece of the puzzle that all of us now have to understand the timing for which we will place that piece of the puzzle to have that picture done. And therefore, I take this opportunity not only just to welcome the OECD Centre to Barbados officially, but certainly to thank you and the IDB for demonstrating again that you can work, that institutions can work collaboratively together, but then we must commit to ensuring that the issues and the understanding as to what is required to address the peculiarities of small states, that these now are clearly understood by partners, such that the advocacy that we have been making on behalf of other small states now can become the lived reality of our citizens in the region. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've said a lot, but it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge our ambassador to Ireland, former Central Bank Governor Cleviston Haynes, who has been working very closely with you, Raga, and the team to be able to ensure that not just our joining the centre has been relatively smooth, and certainly the ambassador represented with Ambassador Rada in Paris a few months ago, but certainly in ensuring that the connections with respect to what is required, not just in Barbados, but regionally, is important. And that is why I want to say, Governor, thank you. Well, it's a Governor, Ambassador. Thank you for your leadership again in making this happen. And oftentimes things happen in the background and people are not aware. Your team, Raga, has been working and constantly in contact with us here, certainly with the IDB as well. And Edmund, I thank you and the team here in Barbados for allowing us to get here. And I look forward really to further fleshing out of the details in terms of the reflections from the panelists on the report. But as policymakers and people who make things happen, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we strip away all of the academia, quote unquote, and we focus on what is the right thing to do at the right time for the people of this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Straughn. We invite you now to view a pre-recorded message from Mr. Mathias Cormann, the Secretary General of the OECD.
A new joint publication by the OECD and the Inter-American Development Bank. A special thank you to Barbados for hosting this event. The Caribbean countries have achieved significant progress in enhancing growth and living standards over the past 2 decades. Indeed, between 2000 and 2023, the region has grown at about 2.5% per year on average, above the OECD average of 1.2% over the same period. This growth was supported by rising levels of investment, which increased from 23% as a share of GDP in 2015 to 27% in 2023. also well above that across Latin America and the OECD, which stood at about 20% and 23% respectively. Between 2013 and 2023, foreign direct investment net inflows as a percentage of GDP were on average 6.2%, also significantly higher than the OECD and Latin American averages of 1.9 and 3.3% respectively. So our Development Dynamics report highlights 3 recommendations to build on this progress and to tackle key structural challenges moving forward, including efforts to boost productivity, to build climate resilience, and to increase labour market formalisation. First, in relation to deepening regional integration to help overcome challenges related to small populations and geographic dispersion. The Caribbean community set an objective to establish a single market in 2001. However, only an estimated 57% of the required measures, such as the removal of trade barriers and development of region-wide sectoral policies, have been completed so far. Import and export restrictions continue to negatively affect trade within the region, and tackling those regulatory hurdles and investing in the modernization of airport and port infrastructure would significantly improve transport connectivity and lower logistics costs, and ultimately helping Caribbean economies to benefit from regional and global supply chain integration. Second, in relation to optimizing resource mobilization to boost finance for development. In 2022, average tax revenues in the Caribbean accounted for 21% of GDP, significantly below the OECD average of 34%. Increased fiscal revenues would enable further investment in key drivers of development, for example, high-quality school education and infrastructure. Towards this, the OECD will provide tailored technical support and capacity building to help jurisdictions in the Caribbean and beyond to fully benefit from the global minimum tax under the OECD G20 two-pillar solution. We have begun a pilot program with 9 countries participating across the world, including Jamaica. The third, in relation to boosting climate resilience and adaptation. We estimate Caribbean countries lost an average of 2.1% of GDP annually due to climate-related extreme weather events between 1980 and 2020. So integrating climate considerations into long-term infrastructure planning and improving disaster preparedness through investment in early warning systems will be key. Several countries are already making good progress. St. Lucia, for example, is advancing on climate adaptation through a national infrastructure assessment framework that provides resilience standards for all future infrastructure projects. The OECD's Latin America and the Caribbean regional program supports policymakers in seizing these opportunities through policy dialogue that brings countries in the region closer to OECD standards and best practices. We are also pleased to welcome Barbados as a new member of the OECD Development Centre, which will benefit from the country's unique insights and policy experiences. Here at the OECD, we look forward to continuing to offer evidence-based tools and best practices in support of strong, sustainable and inclusive growth across the Caribbean region. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, everyone, for your warm welcome remarks. We will now transition to our first session, One Caribbean and Caribbean Development Dynamics, a Renewed Engagement. Please welcome Anton Edmunds, the General Manager of the Country Department at the IDB, to deliver this critical framing presentation.
So a couple of things. I didn't realize it was a critical framing intervention, and I thought it was just filler. But then, Minister, you went a little longer, so no, I'm kidding. So, Ministers, good to see you again. Good to be back in Barbados. Director, good to meet with you. Good to see a lot of friends and colleagues here in the audience. Actually, some of these interventions, or some of the statements here, will mirror some of the conversations that a lot of us have had before. Recently with Daniel, in the past with Rodinald Soomer, and others in this room as it relates to us working together. Of course, I can't figure out the password to my iPad right now, so. Okay. All right, there we go. And, you know, one of the tough things as well is sort of stepping in to speak after your president has already spoken and sort of taken all of the talking points, but he's gone, so maybe I can make some stuff up. So, look, at the end of the day, for us, a great partnership with you. I must say, you commended your colleagues in terms of their stick-to-itiveness, and I'm going to be happy to delete this WhatsApp group that we're on together, because they were very much on top of things, so all credit to them in terms of pulling this together. We're very, very happy to have partnered with the OECD on this report, and fundamentally what this tells us is that collaboration across the international community is essential for all of us, for us in the region especially, but for us globally. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn from each other. I want to focus a little bit on One Caribbean, only because One Caribbean addresses some of the items that are listed here in the report. So as it relates to the issue of building climate resilience and harnessing the potential of natural endowments in the region, one of the things that we've launched earlier this year through this One Caribbean initiative is, for example, a national infrastructure investment plan mechanism. And it's one that we're very proud to be partnering with Barbados on. We're looking at Belize, also the Bahamas, in terms of their national development plan. I think the agreement is that if we can work together, if we can develop these plans, if we can help governments implement these plans, we will see the kind of resilience that we're going to need in the region. Now, the reality is we can't do it alone. And if you believe, as I do, that an integrated Caribbean is not just the members of the IDB, it's the OECS and elsewhere. It means entities like the CDB need to be at the table with us, and we need to partner with you to make sure we replicate this kind of engagement along the space. So we have a resilient infrastructure throughout the region. In addition to that, we're working with the CDB and the World Bank, for example, on disaster risk management systems. Once again, it's tough, and we discussed this upstairs, for countries to meet with us 1 week or 1 day, and the next day meet with another entity, and the next day meet with somebody else. We need to get our acts together. So I think one of the elements here in terms of the resilience component of it is us partnering to develop, to design, in collaboration with the governments, the intervention, so we can provide the support and not be a pain, as I think sometimes we can be. In terms of social inclusion and the social protection systems, one core element that we're working on here is really and truly understanding key components and data in our societies. So in the case of Suriname, we were involved in a living conditions household survey of living conditions. I think there's one being done here in Barbados, which we're partnering, I think, with the CDB as well, but the government of Barbados is leading that effort, and we believe that that kind of engagement needs to be replicated throughout the region, because at the end of the day, we get to see what exactly the issues are in the households, whether it's violence, whether it's poverty, and then we can build up together the kind of interventions. Once again, we need to replicate that in the Eastern Caribbean. So at the end of the day, we have a cohesive engagement in the space. In Jamaica, we're doing some work on conditional cash payments, the PATH program that exists, which basically tracks kids who parents get payments so kids can go to school. And one of the elements of this is really trying to understand how that works, how has it worked. There are some indications that at a certain point in time, young men still fall off the radar, and that goes to issues of, well, where are the social interventions? Are they taking place? Do they need to match up with this conditional cash program? But those kinds of engagements will help us deepen the social protection systems that exist in our space. As it relates to boosting productivity, under One Caribbean, one of the things that we just recently launched with the University of the West Indies is a fiscal research center. At the end of the day, we were fortunate enough to have the former Minister of Finance commit $1 million, US dollars, into this facility, and then we as an institution committed $400,000 plus some additional resources, and we're looking to crowd in more resources. And at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a regional engagement mechanism where any government can come in and do the analysis that it needs, build up capacity within its ministries of finance. It takes nothing against any interventions that we depend on currently by others to come in, but to build that cadre of people that we need to manage our economies going forward. And I make mention of Compete Caribbean. our colleagues here, because that's key as it relates to private sector engagement. We talk about there's a layer of the private sector that we know can go out to markets, access capital, but the MSME space is a space where we need more data and we need more active engagement. I'm trying to understand what's going on with my voice. I've been struggling with allergies for a while. I think it's being in the IDB. And then, you know, the last two things that I want to focus on here is the President talked about debt for nature swaps and other innovative tools that we've been involved in. Of course, thank the EU and others who have partnered with us and look to partner with us more broadly, more widely in the region. But one element is project preparation facilities, and really and truly building up capacity within the countries themselves. So we have a little bit of a vision, once again, driven by our governors, to see whether we can provide that baseline of opportunity and of options for projects to come in, for us to crowd in the resources within our institution, from IDB Invest, from the PPP unit and others, to then really and truly take these projects from idea through a long gestation period into initiatives, but also to support the governments themselves in building up their own PPP entities. Ultimately, we need to work together. Well, thank you. Ultimately, see, there we go. Ultimately, we need to work much better together. Wow, come on. It's not water, right? So, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about partnerships. And the reality, starting with this report and everything else, it's going to be based, our success is going to be based on partnerships. So I see my brothers, Roddy and Mr. Best in this space. I see colleagues from Caribbean Export and other entities in the region. We're going to have to get our acts together. We're going to have to work more closely together. We're going to have to crowd in the World Bank, CAF, everybody else who wants to be part of what I believe is truly a success story that we can be part of developing in the region. Thank you very much. I look forward to the panels.
Thank you for setting the stage, and it was a critical framing. So now we move into our first panel discussion, Perspectives on Caribbean Development, Environmental, Social, and Economic Challenges and Opportunities. We'll start by having a key message from the report presented by Juan Vazquez Zamora, the Deputy Head of Latin America and the Caribbean for the OECD Development Centre. And we'll also have the panelists, if you would like to come to join us. Rodinald Soomer, the Chief Executive Officer of the CARICOM Development Fund. Damie Sinanan, the Executive Director of Caribbean Export Development Agency. We will also have persons joining us virtually for this panel. Renata Amaral, the Secretary for International Affairs and Development, Ministry of Planning and Budget, Brazil, the Chair of the Board of Governors of the Caribbean Development Bank. They'll both be joining virtually, and then moderating this session will be Chloe Ortiz de Mendeville, the country economist for Barbados at the IDB. So please join me in welcoming our panelists and moderator.
Should we make the presentation for her? Okay.
Where you feel comfortable.
Yes, perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you very much to all. What a pleasure to be here launching this report. Very difficult to speak after such very good interventions, particularly after you, Anton. You made everybody laugh, and I'm not going to be able to. But I will skip any introductory remarks because enough has been said. Let me jump directly into the content of the report. And perfect, that's the presentation. So, as I said, let me jump directly into the content. And first, well, there must be a question you all ask us in bilateral meetings, and you're wondering, what do we mean by the Caribbean? What we're covering in this report is 15 countries of the Caribbean. Basically, almost all sovereign islands, you see them listed there, plus Suriname, Guyana, and Belize. These are the 15 countries that we're covering. While this is the main focus of the very report, in many cases we adopt a broader vision of the Caribbean. We look at the greater Caribbean, particularly when we talk about trade, about integration, about other aspects. We look at all the countries that are part of the Caribbean basin. So while this is the main focus, we adopt a flexible approach to the Caribbean. So this is the country coverage. You may be also wondering what is the thematic coverage of the report. And my director, Raga, said this is a multidimensional report. So this is the first three dimensions that we cover. This is what we call the what. We cover the environmental, social, and macrostructural dimensions in the Caribbean. Sorry, challenges and opportunities that we see in this region. But how do we make the most of those opportunities? How we address these challenges? We cover also the how in this report. We need institutions, we need financial resources, and we need to advance regional integrations and strengthening international partnerships. So these are the two main segments of the report, and they are also the logic of the presentations that we will do today. I will be covering the first three parts, the what. Sebastián Nieto will be covering the how. So let's go directly to the first dimension, environmental challenges and opportunities. We all know Caribbean countries are particularly exposed to climate threats. This is something common knowledge, and we see it unfortunately in the news every second day. But how do we measure it? What are the metrics that we have in our hands to measure this? And here we're using the Notre Dame Adaptation Initiative to show how, in the numbers, we also see this vulnerability of Caribbean economies. Here, there are three dimensions that are looked at. First, the adaptation measures taken by these countries. Second, the exposure of these countries and different populations to these climate threats. And third, the sensitiveness of these countries to climate threats, which means, do these countries have economic sectors that are impacted by these phenomena? And what we see, once again, as I said, is that the Caribbean is much more vulnerable to these threats than Latin America, and it's well above the OECD average. Let me complement this idea of climate vulnerability with some data that we have analyzed in the report. If we take all the climate extreme weather events in the last 20 years, from 2000 to 2020 more or less, and we compare it with the previous 20 years, from 1980 to 2000, the frequency of these events has increased by 85%, which is enormous. So this is very important. If we look at the social side of these impacts, 24 million people have been affected directly by these climate events. Just for those who are not acquainted with it, the population of the Caribbean countries we are covering in the report is more or less 30 million. So just to give you a sense of how much this means. More than 50% of the population in the Caribbean lives within 1.5 kilometers of the coastline, with the huge implications this can have. And all this happens in a region that only contributes 0.23% to global greenhouse emissions. So the idea of common but differentiated responsibilities comes into the discussion at this stage. By the way, 0.23% of greenhouse gas emissions is very similar to the population of the Caribbean as a share of the world, but is less than the GDP of the Caribbean as a share of the world, just to give you a perspective. So what do we do with this? How do we address this? We're focusing on three main areas in the report. First, we need to invest in resilient infrastructure. There is new infrastructure that needs to be done, but needs to be done in a resilient way. We need to also prevent all those events from having such impacts. We need early warning systems, and many countries are doing very well in this. There are some good examples documented in the report. And we also need to have a strategic planning around climate vulnerability. We cannot have isolated actions, but we need strategic planning around adaptation. All this is, of course, costly. It demands investment, but the cost of inaction is much higher. We have calculated, we have taken all these climate events across the last 40 years in the Caribbean. We have seen what is the impact they have on GDP, and if you calculate the average, we see that annually the Caribbean is losing more than 2% of its GDP because of this event. So cost of inaction is high. Investments are needed to address this. I've been focusing mostly on the vulnerabilities, but there's another side of the coin. There's the side of the opportunities that we see when we talk about environmental conditions in the Caribbean. In fact, we are trying to have and to build a narrative through this report of moving from vulnerability to opportunity. Where do we see opportunities, and why do we see opportunities related to environment in the Caribbean? Well, we see them in the 7 sectors that we are presenting there. The energy transition, the blue economy, sustainable tourism and transport, the circular economy, nature-based solutions, and digital transformation. I will not go into the detail, but I assure you the report has a lot of detail for each one of these sectors. But just a couple of examples, illustrative examples. The first one, the blue economy. This region has 10% of the world's coral reefs, 45% of global fish species, 25% of coral species. This is an enormous wealth that you have. And nature-based solutions, for instance, the issue of sargassum, which is an important challenge for the region. With investment, with innovation, we can turn that sargassum into fertilizers, into cosmetics, into electricity and biomass. So we have to think of how to turn these challenges into opportunities. Well, that was the first dimension of, that I wanted to present. Second key dimension, social conditions in the Caribbean. And what we see is, and it's fair to say it, is remarkable progress in many countries in the last decades. Just to illustrate it, life expectancy has increased by more or less 4 years in 3 decades. The years of education of the population have increased by around 3 years. And GNI, real GNI per capita, has increased by 70% in 30 years. So very good news on that front. But something very important that I didn't mention, I should have mentioned before, is the heterogeneity of Caribbean economies. On the right side, you see the Human Development Index across the 15 countries that we are covering, and you see how they score very different. So this is something that I will dig deeper on. I was showing the good news first, but there are, of course, some social challenges in this region. Food insecurity being one of them. We have 37% of the population, on average, of the Caribbean, which are exposed to moderate or severe food insecurity. For different reasons, some of them related to the costs of importing foods, or the difficulties to reach scale in the production of food in Caribbean countries that raises the costs. There are also some important considerations to be taken related to labor markets. We have a labor participation rate on average of around 57%, which is more or less on par with what we see in Latin America. But when we look at women, we see that only 1 in 2 women in working age is working. So this is something very, very important. Let me stop here also on this graph to focus on a particular dimension of labor markets that is very relevant to us, which is informality. We see that informal labor in the Caribbean is more or less 46%. Almost 1 in 2 workers work in the informal sector, with huge implications in terms of low social protection. But when you go more into detail into the data, what you see, and you look at the composition of households in Caribbean countries, you see that 60% of households in the Caribbean have at least 1 person working informally. And 33%, that is 1/3 of households in the Caribbean, have all members working informally. So these are households particularly vulnerable to any climate threat, economic crisis, any issue that they may face. And these are households that need to be targeted by social protection programs and social assistance programs. So I was mentioning social protection. This is very, very important precisely because of the prevalence of informality. And also because we see that the demographic trend, as everywhere else in the world, leads to an aging of society. If you look at the old age dependency ratio of 2050, expected for 2050 compared to 2021, it's going to move from 13.1% to 26.1%. Which means that for each old worker or adult or person, there will be 4 workers. So the rate is going to put a lot of pressure on the social protection system. So this is something very important. What about health and education? There has been a lot of progress in both areas, in both basic services in the Caribbean, but still things have to be improved. For instance, if you look at infant mortality, we have 20 for 1,000 children who die in the Caribbean, compared to 14 for 1,000 in Latin America on average. And if you look at education, there has been very important progress, as I show, mostly in terms of access to the education system and in the quantity of education. But when we talk about the quality, then there are some challenges there. There is a lot of dropout of the school system, which is related to security issues, as was discussed yesterday in the IDB event on security. And also in terms of the performance of teachers and the learning outcomes of this education system. Jamaica and the Dominican Republic participated in the OECD PISA test, which measures learning outcomes in a comparable way through different countries. And we saw some of the challenges that Caribbean countries precisely face on these issues. So, final segment of my presentation related now to economic and macrostructural conditions. And let me start by something structural related to the potential growth that we see in the Caribbean. We have done some estimations, and we see the potential growth in the Caribbean is 1.4%, which is above Latin American countries, but is below advanced economies. So if we want to converge to these advanced economies, we need to invest and promote the drivers of this potential growth. Something that is much related to this potential growth is labor productivity. Labor productivity in 2023 was 46% of the OECD level. And this is somehow altered by the extraordinary growth that we saw in Guyana. If we look at 2021, we saw that labor productivity was 38%. So just to put also one of the key discussions, which is productivity, on the table. Macroeconomic conditions have improved in the recent years. If we look at fiscal deficits and debt, there has been important efforts by Caribbean countries. Fiscal deficits are narrowing, debt levels are reducing, but still high. So this is an important discussion also, and we see very positively all the efforts, for example, that Barbados has been doing in this front. What about the structure of the economy? We have a region where most countries are service-based and some others are commodity exporting economies. And when we talk about services, of course, we talk about tourism as one of the main ones. Tourism represents around 25% of GDP in the Caribbean. And it's not only tourism, but everything that revolves around tourism. But there are some other countries that also depend on commodities. There's food production in some countries. There is, of course, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, potentially in the coming years, that have a lot of potential for production of fossil fuels. So this is also something important. I'm coming towards the end of my presentation, but how do we transform that economic structure? How do we make it more innovative? How do we add value to the production? Well, we need investment. And here also a piece of good news. We see that investment levels in the Caribbean have increased in the last years, reaching a level last year of 27% of GDP. Here we're talking about public and private investment, foreign and domestic investment. And this is above, just to put it in perspective, this is above the average that we see in Latin America, that is more around 20% of GDP. So this is very important. Of course, we need to make those investments work for people, create jobs, and be channeled to sectors where we see opportunities in the Caribbean. Minister Straughn was before referring to technology as a very important dimension of development. And when we look at the export baskets of Caribbean countries, what we see is that low, medium, and high technology manufacturers are mostly imported by Caribbean countries, but not so much exported. So here, there is another policy area that we think is very important. How do we work to generate those technologies, but also to have technology transfers from other countries through international partnerships? And just one final slide and comment, which is related less to the macro level, but more to the micro level, to what firms do. We analyze this survey, the Innovation, Firm Performance, and Gender Survey, to understand what are the main barriers to firm innovation and firms' operations. And what we see is that access to finance, customs and trade regulations, the levels of education of the workforce, tax rates, just to mention the main ones, are the main barriers that firms are facing and confronting to operate, to innovate, and to create jobs. So this is, of course, another topic for discussion that we think is relevant. So with this, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Hello? It works. Thank you very much, Juan. Now we're going to move to the panel discussion part. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge that it's a Friday afternoon. I see a room full of people. And I've heard people are connected online from overseas, across the ocean in Europe, where it's at least 6 hours ahead. So thank you very much, first of all, for being here. And that's a true reflection of the importance of the topic and the importance of the report. So I just want to leave that with you. So I also want to acknowledge that I don't see her on the screen, but we do have a virtual participant as well, Renata Amaral, and we have 2 other panelists here present with us. Now we see you, Renata. Can you hear us? Perfect. And we also have Mr. Rodinald Soomer and Damie Sinanan. So I will adopt Iceland culture of using the first name, if you don't mind, because we're doing a cultural exchange today. And I will start by introducing Rodinald. Welcome.
Thank you.
He is the Chief Executive Officer of the CARICOM Development Fund. And he's been there for almost 10 years, as I understand. But before that, he's had a very long career. And he worked as the head of Economic Development Policy Unit at the OECS, and also in the Ministry of Planning, Development and Environment of St. Lucia. And as part of his work in the OECS, he supervised regional sector programs in many sectors, such as agriculture, tourism, statistics, e-government, and he had a lead role in the preparation of a regional growth and development strategy. So, with no further ado, I will go with the questions. I know that the topic of this panel is focusing on challenges and opportunities, but I think we've talked about challenges many, many times, and it's the time to really look ahead, look forward, and think about where those opportunities are. So let's try to frame our questions and answers looking ahead. So the first question is that in your institution, you do have the mandate of providing financial assistance and also technical assistance to the most disadvantaged countries in the Caribbean region. And I would like to know what are the key priorities in moving that agenda forward and ensuring that you help the countries that are most vulnerable in terms of socioeconomic progress and also environmental exposure. How are you helping them? What are the key priorities at your institution right now?
Thank you, Chloe. And let me just quickly take this opportunity to thank the OECD and IDB for inviting me and the CDF to be part of this discussion. And thanks to Minister Straughn for recommending me. You took me back there to some of the things that I did earlier in my career that I probably had forgotten. But yeah, thanks for that question. The CDF, first of all, I need to say, is a CARICOM treaty-based organization. So we are provided for in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and our mandate, as you indicated, is to attend to the needs of disadvantaged countries, regions, and sectors whose situations of disadvantage could be exacerbated by deeper regional integration. And I'm just going to look quickly at the mandate from the point of view of the report, the agreement for the CDF, which is a sort of treaty-based agreement in itself. So the priorities of CDF are to address economic dislocation and other adverse economic and social impact arising from the CSME. And what this really means is that while we proceed with deeper integration, which is supposed to bring benefits of having a single market and economy, you could also have disparities arising because of differentials in resource endowments and ability to take advantage of opportunities in the single market and economy. So in addressing that dislocation, what we try to do is to build greater economic and social cohesion across the community. And that is like the chapeau for everything that we do. But in terms of specific thematic areas, we are to focus on structural diversification and infrastructural development, promoting regional investment and regional resource mobilization to support that investment, and business development and enterprise competitiveness. So these are the main areas. Now, in terms of how these have translated into thematic areas of intervention based on the demands for the country, from the countries, we do projects and programs in infrastructure, environmental resilience and climate action, focusing a lot on sustainable energy and resilient infrastructure. And to support that, we have launched financial instruments. And I think this is relevant to the conversation because part of how we execute our mandate is not just from the resources we get from the countries into our capital fund, but we have to leverage these resources to establish programs and instruments that are aligned with our mandate. So in the area of renewable energy, we have a credit risk abatement facility, which has a technical assistance SMEs component, as well as a partial guarantee facility that incentivizes investment in renewable energy by SMEs. And we also recently launched a resilience fund in January this year, which focuses on climate and economic resilience across a number of sectors. And I should simply acknowledge at this point, because I know some announcements will be made, that we are very happy that IDB Invest is one of the first investors in that fund. So I think it's appropriate that I'm here in this forum, helping to launch this report and the programs that will emerge from it. So also quickly, we also look at in terms of regional investment mobilization. There's an area that we think needs a lot of attention, that while we have not gotten many requests for support, but we know it's needed, and that is the area of production integration or multi-country investment programs. We see some evidence of that coming through in the investment programs from the utilities, where countries have renewable energy resources that outstrip their demand, their domestic demand, and then there's opportunity to export energy across borders. So I think this is an area in terms of resilience building and regional investment that we need to engage in more, and I think this is an area that's ripe for partnerships as well. One last area I want to mention that we are engaged in is community empowerment. I had mentioned that we, in terms of addressing disparities and disadvantage, what we're trying to do is to build social and economic cohesion. So while the treaty is speaking to addressing disadvantaged regions and sectors, because of the small size of a lot of these countries, the concept of a region within a country doesn't make a lot of sense. So when we were rolling out this cohesion policy for CARICOM, we determined that it would be more appropriate, especially for the smaller countries in the region, the smaller island states, to look at disadvantaged communities. So we are developing a community empowerment program around that need. And that community empowerment program would crowd in a lot of the interventions in the various sectors in which we operate. And that also is another area in which we think there's a lot of opportunity for partnership as well.
Thank you. Very interesting. There are two words that kind of resonated with me. You were talking about endowment, of natural endowment of the countries, and also you were talking about economic diversification. So if you look at the Caribbean region, you have countries that are somewhat similar and other countries that are very, very different, right? You have countries that specialize in extractive industries. You have countries that specialize in tourism, which is another way of exploiting your natural environment. And how do you strike the balance between getting those economic benefits of using your resources, but also ensuring sustainability and ensuring that you don't run into more vulnerabilities to climate change, to external shocks, etc. How can you do it? And how can we just stop focusing on our endowment and how we exploit it, but on how we protect it and how we actually diversify our economy?
Yes, thanks, Chloe. I'm going to try to respond to that question, using tourism as a platform. I think that with COVID, all of the crises that we've been dealing with, COVID, climate change, what I have found, and a lot of people working in the region, in regional institutions at CARICOM and so on, have found is that our growth and development agenda has sort of been put a little bit on the back burner while we deal with these crises. And I think when we are ready, and I think we should be ready now, to revisit that agenda in a very focused way, I think tourism is going to be critical to how we move forward. And I think we learn a lot from the resilience of tourism, the way it has bounced back post-COVID. There are many people who felt that it would not have come back so quickly. And I think there are two things we need to do broadly, given that tourism is macro-critical for our development. We need to work on a comprehensive tourism sustainability program and a tourism resilience building program, learning from the lessons that we've learned with both the COVID and building resilience against climate change. So I would posit that there's a lot of scope for diversifying around tourism, but to do that, we have to make sure that it's sustainable and it's resilient. And there are programs that we need to build around both of these themes. So for example, we talk about leakages in tourism. I think this, in very much the same way that CARICOM has looked at the food security issue and designed a 20 by 20 program, which seeks to reduce the food import bill by 20% by 2025, and these dates might have to change. We could look at the flip side of tourism leakages and design a comprehensive tourism linkages program. Call it 30 by 30 or 40 by 40. And I think this is what the region needs to do. I know, for example, that CARICOM had been looking at how measures that you could put in place, revenue generating measures, to allow tourism to pay for itself. One area that was being looked at was marketing, and looking at perhaps agreeing on an acceptable regional tax on airline tickets, right? So there are things that we need to do, and I like the idea of looking at domestic resource mobilization, but we need to be careful how we do it. We need to make sure we do it in such a way that it doesn't disincentivize investment. But I think there's a balance that can be struck. And part of that balance must be finding a way for the tourism private sector in particular to contribute to the preservation of the environment on which the industry depends and to pay for environmental services. So I think we need to take a comprehensive look at sustainability, both from the point of view of environmental sustainability of the industry, but also financial self-sustainability. But in the short term, we don't have the fiscal space to do that. So a lot of the resilience building, which is the other dimension that we need to do, this is where we need partnerships, to build resilience so that we can be comfortable with continuing to have a dependence on tourism as the lead sector because we know we're building the resilience. And then we can build a sustainability program around that. I mean, we can come up with specific examples of how we strike the balance between growth and pressure on the environment. But I think we need to start with a macro approach and take a sort of whole of cluster approach to tourism. And if we take that perspective, then we will see many opportunities for creating a very broad and impactful linkages program.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to our second panelist, Mr. Damie Sinanan. He is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Export Development Agency. And throughout his career, he's focused on firms' competitiveness, trade, export promotion, and many other areas related to the private sector. So as you may suspect, we're going to talk about one of the aspects of regional integration, which is trade, given your expertise. So when you think about the Caribbean, and you look at the numbers, you notice that
intra-regional trade is very small. However, Caribbean countries, they have a high dependency on imports. Now, the question is, what are the reasons for that, first? And second, how can we overcome the challenges moving towards the opportunities, again, to actually develop an intra-regional market, and not only develop the intra-regional market, but also how do we take advantage of global value chains, and how do we insert the Caribbean in such chains?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the IDB and to the OECD for inviting me to be part of this panel. I love engaging in these firm discussions about development in the Caribbean region. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And yes, you're right. I'm going to focus my interventions really on business, private sector, and small and medium-sized enterprises, because those are really the lifeblood of the Caribbean region, and there can be no regional development without a strong, resilient private sector, including support for small and medium-sized enterprises and vulnerable groups, women-owned businesses and youth-owned businesses. So in your question, you mentioned some aspects of Caribbean trade and private sector, and I wanted to sort of lay out, just put a little context about what we're talking about. I know the report covers it very well, but I will mention it. So intra-regional trade within the Caribbean, that's countries trading with other countries, only represents 6.7% of total trade. That's extremely low. In terms of food security, over 90% of food in the region is imported. That is unsustainable, and that opens us up to a number of challenges. Caribbean's participation in world exports has been decreasing over the past 10 years. Right now it stands at 0.23% of total trade, which is extremely low. In the Caribbean region, we specialize in very low value-added segments of global value chains. Most of our exports, over half, for example, are in primary products and resource-based manufacturers, with only 4.1% being in high technology manufacturers. So that sort of lays the context about what we're talking about. Like the Caribbean, in terms of the private sector, we really have to build a stronger private sector that is more diverse and more innovative in the way that they approach business, if we are to make any sort of dent in this grand development plan that we have, that we absolutely need to do. One of the major challenges that the private sector faces, and it's typical for small countries that the region makes up, most of the region is small island development states, is scalability. Businesses operate very small, and to penetrate new markets, unfortunately, they cannot meet that market demand because they do not have the economies of scale. They are unable to compete on cost because at the end of the day, when you're looking at other regions, China, South Africa, South America, who can take advantage of large populations and large production capacities, can always produce goods and services cheaper than the Caribbean region can. So scalability is a huge issue for the Caribbean region. Now, how do we impact upon scalability? And one of the ways we have to impact upon that is a topic that we've been speaking about all afternoon. It's regional integration. If we can get our businesses to work together across borders, we can build that scalability up. Now, that faces a bunch of challenges, and I'm not going to get into all of those challenges this afternoon. But in terms of supporting that sort of regional cooperation, we have to do more in terms of making it easier to do business across borders in the Caribbean region. And this is where the CSME comes in. We mentioned that only 57% of policies or methods are under the CSME have been enacted to date. We have to do more to improve cross-border trade. That includes investments across borders, a Caribbean Investment Code, that includes shipping and logistics, that includes taxations, that includes free movement of capital and labor. These are all extremely important if we have to have that regional trade and to build that scalability so our businesses can do business on a larger scale and make an impact in terms of getting into new markets and attracting capital into the region. A second problem that we face is most of our business cannot meet international standards in new markets. So we're trying to increase trade with European Union, with North America. But unfortunately, the regulatory requirements in those markets are beyond our small and medium-sized enterprises, and there are even more. We know the European Union are putting in place their CBAM initiative, their carbon border assessments. That's going to present an additional challenge. So we have to work with our small and medium-sized enterprises and our businesses to make sure that they can meet these international standards. And usually that's a capital issue. And we have to make sure that we have trade financing and funding for our small and medium-sized enterprises. We spoke about logistics costs. I mean, interregional trade is so expensive to move goods and services and people around the region. I think all of us know here, if we have to go from here to St. Lucia, it's probably cheaper, maybe easier, who knows, to fly up to Miami and fly back down. That's a fact. Yeah. And those of us who know Miami Airport know that's no easy task. So, how do we improve transportation and logistics and moving people around the region? I always equate it to a chicken and egg situation. If there is more trade, there will be more shipping. However, some might argue if there's more shipping, there will be more trade. So we have to figure out what is the right balance to make sure that we can make shipping and logistics easier across the region. And we have to remember we are service exporters as well. So moving people and services around the region is an issue. Is an opportunity. I also want to mention digitalization and innovation. That's an area that is severely lacking in the Caribbean region, and it's an area that we all can impact, all of us in the room can impact together. And I like the theme that was mentioned earlier about collaboration. At the end of the day, all of us are working together, all of us being developmental partners, and we're working in the same areas: digitalization of business, climate resilience, and so on. We can't always be reinventing the wheel and doing the same thing over and over with different institutions. Collaboration is an absolute necessity. And in the area of digital business and innovation, Caribbean Export, through the support of our long-standing partner, the European Union, have been working very closely to work together to have businesses become more innovative and adopt digital business practices. And recently, we entered into a partnership with Compete Caribbean of the IDB to develop a Caribbean Digital Transformation Institute. We're also working with our colleagues at CDB to improve the ease of doing business here in the Caribbean region. So that sort of collaboration is absolutely necessary if we're going to make a dent in this developmental space and to make sure that we Caribbean can achieve their goals. So I've said quite a lot, so I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to answer any follow-up questions.
Yes. I would like a very short answer for this question. For the people that are not within the region, many times they see the Caribbean and they think, oh, but these countries are all the same. How are they going to trade with each other? So very, very briefly, what do you reply to them, and where do you see those opportunities for actually trading?
Yeah, I mean, and that's one area as well, and I'll be very brief. I mean, we cannot treat the Caribbean as a monolith. We're talking about 15 member states, and 15 member states are all different. From the Dominican Republic to Dominica, which is not the same country for those of us who are, my colleagues in Dominica will get that. So my advice for anyone who's trying to do business in the Caribbean region is to learn the territory that you are in, understand its dynamics. Trinidad and Tobago is different from Barbados, is different from Jamaica, is different from Belize. Learn the dynamics of the country that you're in and make the necessary connections so that you can continue to do business. And until we get there where we can look at the Caribbean as a territory that you can do business, it depends on the territory that you're working in.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, we have online Miss Renata Amaral. She's joining us from Brazil. Welcome. She is the Secretary for International Affairs and Development of the Ministry of Planning and Budget, but she's also the chair of the Board of Governors at the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB. Sorry. She is an international trade lawyer, but here Damie took over your topic, so we won't talk about trade with you. But I would like to acknowledge that she has extensive experience in bilateral and regional trade negotiations and also in trade policy. And she has served as an advisor for both the public and the private sector. So welcome. And my question to you, given that you have two hats, It's going to be more on the CDB side, right? So the countries in the Caribbean, they're subject to many vulnerabilities from climate change, from their geography, from their size, etc. They have humongous needs in terms of climate adaptation, investment in resilient infrastructure. So how is the CDB helping the countries in the region to actually become more resilient, as we are very aware that climate change is going to make life even harder for people in the region if we do not take action?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, even virtually. I would rather be there with you in Barbados, but it's quite a busy time now here in Brazil, so it was hard to make adjustments to the schedule in order to be there. But I know there are several friends of mine in the audience, including the new president of the Caribbean Development Bank that I haven't met in person yet, but I heard that Daniel is there. Among other friends, Sebastian from the OECD, Minister Ryan from Barbados. We have been working a lot together for the past weeks in order to elect the new president of the bank. And it's my pleasure to be speaking on behalf of the Board of Governors about the bank. We understand the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, as it is a key financial institution dedicated to the Caribbean region. The bank has a long history of fostering financial development in the area, including support for the private sector. This year, in 2024, our outstanding position reached $1.432 million, with the top three exposures being to the Bahamas, 17%, Barbados, 13%, and Belize, 11%. Like the entire region, the Caribbean Development Bank is facing challenges, of course, in addressing major regional issues such as climate change. On the financial side, we are implementing the Capital Deficit Framework, the CAF, G20 framework. G20 was hosted by Brazil this year, so we have been dipping in this issue with CAF, and we are adopting balance sheet optimization (BSO) initiatives and exchange exposures agreement to free up lending capacity of the bank. We need to move towards innovative initiatives such as supporting debit for nature swaps, which Barbados, for example, has successfully implemented very recently. Another possibility is the adoption of the climate contingent debit clause. This clause aims to help borrowing member countries gain fiscal space to better address natural hazard situations by pausing debt repayments in the event of climate-related disasters. On the operational side, the Caribbean Development Bank is finalizing the 11th replenishment negotiation for the Special Development Fund, the SDF, which is one of the main sources of concessional funds for the region. The operations under the 11th cycle will focus particularly on climate change and gender equality. The bank, the Caribbean Development Bank, will place special emphasis on developing institutional capacity in borrowing member countries through technical assistance and a close dialogue with governments and the private sector. The new president, Daniel from Barbados, will take office in February, we expect. And I'm pretty sure he'll face the challenge of leading the institution amid the pressing need to enhance climate change initiatives in the region. We really hope that his term will be a landmark for the success of the CDB. The bank has faced challenges throughout the year. But I'm very happy that we are concluding this year with a new president, and from what I heard, a new president that is loved by everyone in the bank. So I really have high expectations for you, Daniel. And I'm really happy that we could conclude this process for the benefit of the institution. Brazil will host, for the first time, the annual meeting of the bank next year in Brasilia in June. And we also have COP30 next year here in Brazil, and I'm pretty sure that we can connect the dots with these two major events in the country in order to speak more and more, louder and louder, about the importance of leveraging capital and public sector money for climate change and to address the challenges that we have right now. Actually, it's not in the future, but right now we're facing several complicated climate issues around the region. Not only the Caribbean, but the Caribbean, of course, faces a different level of challenges than we do, for example, here in South America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renata. And Daniel is here. Do you want to say something, Daniel? Given that she put you on the spotlight?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair of the event, and of course, Madam Chair of the Board of Governors. And it is nice to hear that I'm loved. My team, it's nice to hear it every now and again. But certainly, if I could take a moment and just reinforce what our chairperson has said about the role that the bank needs to play going forward. Certainly, we're excited about the future. And of course, anchoring matter of climate resilience. And of course, we heard Anton speak to the importance of partnerships. And of course, we have, along with IDB, two of our, great partners in CDF and Caribbean Export, along, of course, with the European Union, EIB, and the OECD. So certainly, I think being the sole indigenous multilateral financing institution in the region, the bank we're quite stoked, we're quite excited about the role we will play to deliver sustainable development solutions to the good people of our Caribbean. And we look to do that with all represented here and others even further afield. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. So we got off track for a second, but we're back. So who's the timekeeper? Do we have time for 1, 2 more questions or 0 questions? 0 questions. Okay. We'll have a chance to connect afterwards. Thank you very much, esteemed panelists. And with that, I'll give a microphone to Shiva.
Thank you very much for our first panel and that engaging discussion. Just a point of note. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Motley will not be joining us to give remarks. So just giving everyone just the note that we will proceed after this panel discussion into our final remarks. I think we'll change it up just a little bit for this next panel discussion, Making Development Happen in the Caribbean, Institutions, Finance, and International Partnerships. I believe for this presentation, if we can just select Sebastian Nieto Parra, the head of the Latin America and Caribbean at OECD Development Centre, give the presentation, and then I'll ask the panelists to join if that makes it easier for you to do the presentation. So, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, and it's a pleasure to present the second part of this report that, as Juan mentioned before, we have 6 chapters, and I will focus on the second part of the report. It's more on the how, the elements to take into consideration when we talk about the need to pass reforms and how to achieve the sustainable development in the Caribbean economy. So behind the how, we have the role of institutions. We have as well the financial resources that are needed. And last but not least, we need to go beyond the national borders and to think about the regional integration within the Caribbean, but also how we can promote very international partnerships to make reform happen. So these are the elements that we studied in this report as the how, the elements that can help on the implementation of the reforms. Let me start with the role of institutions. And when we talk about the role of institutions, a key aspect behind this is to understand the citizens' perceptions. And when we look at this, one key aspect that we observe is that the satisfaction with public services has been decreased in the past decade in the Caribbean economies. Here we have the example of public schools, but we have the same for other indicators that can help us to understand the citizens' perceptions and regarding the public services in the Caribbean. But it's not only in the Caribbean that we're observing this. We have this as well in Latin America, in other developing and emerging markets as well, because there is this demand for better public services. And it's not only to think now in terms of the quantity, in terms of the coverage of education, but also in terms of the quality of education that we have a huge demand. Then, when we ask to the Caribbeans about the top concerns for them, so we observe that security and second, economic opportunities are there. So these are the main concerns that we have when we have the question to Caribbean citizens, and that's what we observe for these selected countries where we have the data. Certainly, security is an issue. Here we have an indicator on the intentional homicides in the Caribbean. And despite the heterogeneity that we can have in this figure, in most of the countries, we have that the average is higher than what we have in Latin America and higher than what we have in low-income countries, and it's much higher than what we have at the OECD as well. So it's well related to what we had in the past 2 days here in Barbados with the Security and Justice Summit organized by the IDB. So it's really timely, this discussion in the Caribbean, and this is a concern as well from Caribbean citizens. When we talk about the economic opportunities, it's not only in terms of economic growth, but also to go through sustainable growth and the role of climate change and how to respond to Caribbean economies are in terms of data coverage, but also in terms of the openness of this data. And what we observe in this figure is that this is a big issue when we look at the need to implement reforms and the data that we have for this. This is a sample of several countries in the Caribbean. So probably first the starting point is to increase the coverage as well to have this kind of indicators. And secondly, to work together with the statistical offices. And here we have some examples in the report on how we can help on this, on how building strong institutions, in particular the statistical offices, can help at the end to build more data and better data for the policy making. A second aspect as well to take into consideration is the role of different actors, and to have a participatory process where we should have individuals independently on the income, but also to think about the role of women in the policy-making process. We have at the OECD the social institutions and gender index that can help us to see where we are through different indicators on gender across developing countries and across developed countries as well. And what we observe is that one of these indicators can help us to see where we are in terms of the women's political representation in Caribbean economies. And as you see in this figure, there is a bias towards men in the policy-making process in terms of the political representation, and that's an aspect as well to consider when we talk about the policy-making process. Last but not least, this is a figure that probably is really difficult to read, so you need to trust me on the results that we have. Trust in institutions, trust in the the report, we have the national development plans across Caribbean economies. That's a good news to have these plans because at the end that can help us to see the policy priorities. But one aspect to consider is the participatory process behind these national development plans. So how to involve the private sector, the civil society behind these plans, and that can help us to rethink the social contract where we have different actors. At the same time, we should have in mind that there is diversity in terms of the priorities of the national development plans across different topics that we cover in these reports, like circular economy, energy transition, or aspects related to transport or nature-based solutions. So all these aspects we analyzed in the national development plans for the countries in the Caribbean where we have this instrument, and this can help us to understand the policy priorities as well and how to promote social contracts following these priorities. Let me now focus on the second element that we see really important in terms of how to implement reforms, and is the financial resources. When we talk about the financial resources, we have public resources, private resources. Let me start with taxes. The fiscal resources that we have in the Caribbean compared to the OECD, but also to Latin America, to Africa, to Asia and Pacific. The number that we have for Caribbean economies is that 21% of our GDP is the fiscal resources that we have in the Caribbean. That's below the OECD average. The OECD average is close to 34% of our GDP, but it's similar to the level that we have in Latin America, as you see in this figure. We don't have in this chart the numbers for Africa and Asia and Pacific, but we have in another chart in the report 16% in Africa, and in Asia and Pacific we have 19%. So in the Caribbean is slightly higher than what we have in other emerging regions. So the question here is not to raise taxes in all the Caribbean countries. Actually, in the case of Barbados, now is close to the OECD average. The question is how to promote a better structure of the taxation system in Caribbean economies. And for that, as President Ilan Goldfajn mentioned at the beginning, to promote progressivity of the taxation system, to promote as well entrepreneurship when we talk about the design of taxes in the Caribbean. Second aspect is related to the debt service of our tax revenues. So as you see in this figure, the high levels of debt at the end, you have an impact in terms of the debt service over tax revenues, and that's something that we analyze as well compared to the expenditure on education or on health, where at the end you have a cost of the debt, not only in terms of tax revenues, but also in terms of the social expenditures that you can have. For that, so you need to improve the debt management. There is a commitment, for instance, in Barbados to reduce the levels of public debt over GDP. So that's one aspect more related to the fiscal framework. A second aspect, of course, is to see as well on the debt creditors. And here you have a huge heterogeneity across creditors in the Caribbean. You have the case, for instance, of Dominican Republic that is more linked to private creditors, the case of Haiti that is more linked to bilateral creditors. So you have a heterogeneity, and the policy solution is not unique. It depends as well on who is buying this debt or who is your counterpart for this, when we talk about debt restructuring or other kind of actions that we can have in the public debt market. Then a third aspect to consider as well is the new or the innovative debt instruments that we have in the Caribbean. We have observed a huge increase in terms of the social sustainability linked green, blue bonds in the Caribbean. That's a good news in order to respond to the green and just transition that is needed in the region. But also we have observed an increase of other instruments, like the case of the debt for natural swaps. We have the recent case of Barbados with guarantees from the IDB and the European Investment Bank. We have the catastrophe bonds as well that they have been increased in the Caribbean. And last but not least, the natural disaster clauses that we have observed as well in some Caribbean economies, and in particular in the case of Grenada, that's the first country in the world to execute this clause recently to pass the debt repayment. So we have these examples. We need to think beyond the national borders as well. We have some examples beyond the Caribbean to promote regional instruments like the regional catastrophe bonds that can be implemented as well within Caribbean countries and to go beyond the national borders when we talk about finance. An additional aspect to consider as well is the sustainable finance frameworks. So that's a figure that you see the huge number of countries in the Caribbean that have been implemented these sustainable finance frameworks. That's a very good news to enhance transparency, to develop the regional markets. But still, we need to monitor these assets, and that's something beyond the Caribbean on how to coordinate the different taxonomies that you have at the national level, at the regional level, at the international level, to promote the effectiveness of the innovative instruments that I mentioned before. So that's an ongoing agenda that goes beyond the Caribbean, and we did actually a paper on this recently for the case of Latin America and the Caribbean. Just to conclude on the finance, we observe that still, in terms of the development of the financial markets, there is room for improvement. And here you have the data on domestic credit to the private sector as a share of the GDP, that for the Caribbean economies is 42%. That's below the Latin American average, that's below the OECD average. But the good news that we have is that the solvency of the financial system is there in most of the countries in the Caribbean. So you have a capital adequacy of banks in the Caribbean that is higher than. First point is that intra-trade remains quite low in the Caribbean, compared even to other regions in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's close to 7% for cost that we have. The second one for cost that we have. The second one is more on the persistent non-tariff barriers that we have in the Caribbean. And last but not least, we need in the Caribbean. And last but not least, we need to upgrade the structure of the economy. To think beyond the infrastructure that's needed, the logistical aspects, the regulatory aspects that can help as well to increase the trade facilitation across Caribbean economies. Then, in terms of the international resources that we have, let me just highlight two aspects. One is on remittances, that they are relatively high compared to the average that you have in the emerging world. So it's close to 6% of our GDP, and this is the main source of financial resources that we have when we compare to ODA or portfolio instruments or FDI. FDI is close to 4% of our GDP, one of the highest numbers in the world when we see the total FDI over GDP, and that's why it's really welcome different agendas that we have to attract further FDI, and as well the agenda that the European Commission has on the Global Gateway that can help to increase as well the effectiveness and the relevance of this FDI on green transition, on digital transformation, on social aspects that are important for the Caribbean region. To conclude, so we need as well unique voice of the Caribbean in the multilateral discussions. And for that, just to think about the climate negotiations and to have a unique voice, but also discussions on global financial architecture reforms. So discussions on the fourth conference on for sustainable finance development next year in Sevilla. That's an important item to work together in terms of how to rethink the financial architecture in Caribbean economies. And that's an aspect that we are ready to help on this and to promote this discussion within the Caribbean, but also beyond the Caribbean, to have discussions on the aspect that I mentioned before on debt management, on the development as well of the private markets. Second big event is related to financing common, the role of the national development banks and how to improve the role to increase the investment in infrastructure and to promote sustainable projects from SMEs. That's going to take place in South Africa in February next year. And last but not least, the Paris Pact for People and Planet, where there are important discussions as well on debt management. So these are the elements that I wanted to highlight in this presentation, but you can find more in the report. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so very much. So now we have the panel discussion, and so I will invite the panelists to join us here. We have Malgorzata Wasilewska, the Ambassador to the European Union to Barbados. Brenda Wills, the High Commissioner of Canada to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. Keith Nurse, the President, College of Science, Technology and Applied Arts, Trinidad and Tobago. Cristina Pérez, the Ambassador of Spain to Trinidad and Tobago, will be joining us virtually. And our moderator for this session, Clavston Haynes, Ambassador of Barbados to Ireland. Welcome our distinguished panelist and moderator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Making development happen in the Caribbean, institutions, finance, and international partnerships. And we hope to discuss how to promote the reforms that are needed to improve lives in the Caribbean. We'll focus on the role of strengthened public institutions, the need to mobilize public and private financial resources, and the role played by innovative financing instruments. And we also, if we have a chance, also look at how regional integration and renewed international partnerships can contribute to more resilient, innovative, and inclusive societies. And I think the broad focus of this session really will be the international partnerships. We have, as part of the panel, a number of our partners here in the region, and we want to assess what your priorities are and what do you see as the actions that we need to be able to follow in order to accelerate development in the region to achieve the SDGs, to address issues pertaining to climate change, et cetera. So our first panelist, I'm going to make sure I get my Polish right, Malgorzata Wasilewska. Very good. She'll say the truth on the outside.
She has a lot of practice in Ireland. There's plenty of Polish.
Now, she has been ambassador of the European Union to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean States, the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, and the Caribbean Community since 2020. Earlier in her career at the European Union, she was head of the Division for Conflict Prevention, Peace and Mediation at the EU Security Policy Directorate. In addition, she's a human rights advocate and specialist and has previously worked for organizations such as Amnesty International. So given that background, your question, and it's a sort of multi-pronged question, renewed international partnerships can help Caribbean countries harness opportunities to access financial resources, develop institutions, and integrate with the world. So how can the European Union contribute to advancing some of these objectives to support Caribbean countries advance towards the SDGs? And perhaps you might want to look at the European Union Latin America Global Gateway Initiative and the role that that can play in helping us to go forward.
Thank you very much for that. So our commitment, our renewed partnership was confirmed last year during the EU CELAC summit. And since then, I'm proud to say that we demonstrated how serious we are about these commitments, because a number of things have already happened that were declared last July in Brussels. And next year we will have the next summit, I believe sometime around November, so it'll be an opportunity also to verify how good we are, or we will be, on our word by that point. Global Gateway Initiative, so I'll start with the finance part. Global Gateway Investment Agenda is our way of trying to be more relevant to the region. So we moved from traditional development assistance to trying to attract investments. And trying to attract investment is a key word here, because as we heard in previous sessions, there are challenges not only because we are so far away, but also because many people in Europe will not know the difference between Dominican Republic and Dominica, but just like many people in the Caribbean will not know the difference between Slovakia or Slovenia, or not even be sure where they are on the map. So we don't know each other very well, beyond perhaps some of the obvious countries, and therefore there is this assumption that the Caribbean is all the same. And when most people think of Europe, they think maybe of Germany, France, perhaps Spain or Italy, maybe Netherlands, and then it stops. So what is on offer and how to attract those investments is not such an easy issue. We have a whole range of financial instruments to try and help de-risking those investments, try to find ways to enable the investments. But again, even a medium or a small company in Europe is big by the Caribbean standard. So when they think of Barbados of 270,000 people, the first answer would be, that's far too small for us. It's too far, logistics are expensive, it's too small. So despite the fact that the countries are very different, I think we have to think of investments that go beyond one country. And that is one of the things that we will try to help the region with. We're already working, following the request of Prime Minister Motley, trying to see how we can create platforms, starting with renewable energy, that could help with a different way of looking at it. I have myself been to Poland recently to test a little bit how difficult it is to explain to companies why these markets are attractive. And when you dwell on it for a little bit, it does work. Highly educated people, lack of certain sectors, so finance is available, it is possible to do joint investments. But what we will look at when we try to attract those investments is, as was mentioned before, transfer of technology, job creation, and of course respect of all the legislative frameworks, labor laws, and so on. So we have great ambition. We can mobilize a lot of money to make it happen, but we have to think of those challenges and work on those together. So in this case, the partnership and sort of joint approach will be absolutely critical. There are other barriers that we also have to have honest conversations about. Minister Blackman, I know we've talked about it, but we have to set that date for discussing trade, because already when we have tried to have constructive discussions in Grenada on how to tackle sargassum and turn it into economic opportunity, we're hearing from some interested investors that what will stop them from investing is if there are unrealistic costs or tariffs, let's put it that way, on bringing equipment in order to bring the technology and invest. So we have to unlock those issues, because otherwise we will not succeed in attracting them. We also have very innovative, together with our partners, not only through our European Investment Bank, and I'm glad Cristina is here, but also in cooperation with IDB, CDB, and others. we try to come up with innovative financing, and enabling the swap is a very good example, and we'll continue working with our partners to try and look at other opportunities, including green bonds, I would hope. So de-risking the investments, being creative in our thinking. Of course, I don't need to elaborate on the fact that disaster clauses are already taken on board, and we have been following all the discussions and engaging in terms of financial architecture and following Bridgetown initiative recommendations and so on. So I will stop on finance, but maybe I'll just repeat that we are able to mobilize substantial financing to make that happen, but we have to think of the challenges. Now, on the institutional part, it's kind of nice to be part of the last panel because a lot of things have been said already. So lack of integration. And I think particularly coming from European Union, I can say comfortably how important it is because we experience it. One of the strongest things in Europe is common market. And the second thing that is crucial is free movement of people. And that way we can really capitalize, and I've seen enormous changes in my own country, on all that we've got that is best, regardless of which country it's in. Now, it's no one's secret, and we all talk about it quite a lot, that the Caribbean has a lot of improvement to do this. And I can say that because as partner we spent for years a lot of money to try and help with the integration, but we can only assist. There has to be a will internally. And that creates challenges across the board. Maritime transport, intra-regional trade, and so on. Now, you're all small countries. You all have, for the size of your population, large administrations, but far too small for the tasks and the level of ambition that you have. And that is not going to change. So the only way forward is if your regional institutions can take more of the role that each of you is duplicating in each country. And there are many examples. Barbados has recently developed fantastic legislation on child protection. Should every other island reinvent the wheel, or could there become a model for the others? Brussels, for us, is a source of eternal frustration. I don't know how many of my colleagues are listening from Brussels. But for an average citizen, everything is blamed on Brussels, right? All the regulations I'm sure you've seen all the jokes in the press. Everything is blamed on Brussels. But the role of national administrations has changed quite dramatically because of the integration. It becomes a lot easier. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that is not pointing a finger at anybody, but that is just a reality. And we are much bigger countries, so our capacities are bigger. Yours are unlikely to be that much bigger to address that. So it's not easy solution, but I think I've been in the Caribbean long enough, because I was in Jamaica before. It's my 9th year, that I think I've seen plenty of examples where there is fantastic political vision, there is political will, there are ideas, and then there's nobody to run. And I'm exaggerating, of course, but there's just no capacity to implement all that many of the great leaders would like to do, not to mention that there are many topics on which not all the countries are walking together in the same direction. So we have this wonderful commitment from Belize on enhanced cooperation, but to my knowledge, I don't think it's been used as yet. So that will, in my view, continue to be an institutional challenge, and I'm not sure how, as partners, we are able to help beyond what we have done up to this, because, as I said, we can only accompany. Now, partnerships, I have very little to say about, because I think that's why we are here. We're ready to accompany. The political lead in some of the countries across the region is extremely strong. The vision is extremely strong. And we can walk with you, and we will do our best in every way we can. In other countries, it's not necessarily the same. You don't have the same speed or the same ideas on every topic. That's fine. We will try to accompany. But I think in the current geopolitical climate, we have to think beyond partners as sources of funding. Well, maybe technology, investments, and so on. I think we really have to think what we have in common and where we want to go and how we can, what we need at the center of those partnerships in order to be able to work together. And I think then the partnership can be even more meaningful.
Thank you very much for those provocative comments.
I think I'd like the glass of whatever you had right now.
Yes. So our next panelist is Keith Nurse, who is the president of the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Nurse also serves as an expert member of the Executive Bureau of the UN Committee for Development Policy, a subsidiary body of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. He's also worked as president of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia and as senior economist and advisor at the OECD Development Centre. So Keith, the question is, the report shows that the Caribbean share of global exports has declined and that the technological component of the exports is relatively limited in the Caribbean. What priority actions do you see to spur innovation and innovation-driven enterprises and to support capacity building and technology transfers in the partnership with other countries? And I suppose you might want to build on the integration theme that was introduced.
No pressure at all. That's a really big question. It's probably the hard question of the day, if I may say so. I mean, we really do have to contextualize things. I think the ambassador really hit the nail on the head. If you look at the geoeconomic and the geopolitical context that is emerging, things are going to become increasingly challenging. I think we can all agree on that. And so, the World Bank recently prepared a report that said that middle-income countries are beginning to underperform. And the Caribbean is part of the middle-income trap, we could describe it as that, where they're experiencing both a process of deindustrialization, also de-agriculturalization, and particularly in case of the Caribbean, depopulation. Which is everything from aging populations to outward migration. So it's challenging, particularly for small states, to do what you've asked me to respond to. So that's the caveat. But there's some key things that we can do, which we haven't been doing, I would argue, with a strategic focus. First and foremost is that Caribbean economies are small, like everyone says. But when I was a student at UWI, a phrase was drummed into our heads. We are small, vulnerable economies. It has almost become a mantra, an almost self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that we need to be flipping the script. So it's just like how, I went to do some work in Mauritius, and my last interview there, the guy says, oh, we're not a small island state anymore, we are a big ocean state. And I was like, wow, yeah. That changes the discourse. And so similarly, for example, Caribbean economies are highly dependent on foreign exchange, but we use all of our foreign exchange to import food, health, and energy. Those three areas account for over 60% of our imports, and rising. So if you look at that scenario going forward, it's completely unsustainable, because food prices have been rising over the last, particularly 2 decades, and is likely to rise even further in the next decade or two. And so food import replacement is a critical strategic initiative. But it's linked to health. We have the highest rates of chronic non-communicable diseases in the world, or at least we're close to the top of the heap. And the productivity losses are, again, extremely high. And governments in the Caribbean are spending somewhere between 5 and 6% of their GDP on not health, but also on chronic non-communicable diseases. So that is an area where we need to be shifting our focus so for example, in the area of health, most of our expenditure is on curative health. Lots of hospitals, lots of doctors, lots of nurses. At my college, we're the largest trainer of nurses in the region now. So we like the business, but we need to shift from curative medicine towards preventative health. Preventative health is cheaper and it generates more jobs. And then energy, renewable energy, of course. So these are 3 key areas that we could jump on very quickly that generates new jobs, improves our health, and improves our standard of living. Easy. I know. I'm the academic in the room, Minister Straughn. Export orientation has been largely focused on some traditional areas: tourism, financial services, agriculture, manufacturing, oil and gas. Oil and gas generates a resource curse. I come from Trinidad and Tobago. We need to tell this to Guyana and Suriname. We've been there. We've done that. It's the same across the board in most developing countries. We are not able to move from the commodity extraction modality into higher value addition, even with all the resources that come with oil and gas. So let's hope Guyana and Suriname can not commit the same mistake. But if you look at all of our major tourism-related sectors, export-related sectors, they all have low value addition, and declining value addition. Whether it's tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, you just name it. So what is the growth potential? The growth potential comes from particularly new growth areas, as it's been mentioned: blue, green industries, circular economy, bioeconomy, all really interesting. Digital and fintech, AI. I must take a plug for my college. We just won the IDB Award for Innovation, the Praise Awards. Thanks very much, Cristina Coburn, for introducing that area of innovation in the public policy arena. But creative economy and intellectual property. The fastest rising area of services growth is in intellectual property, which we haven't discussed or mentioned today. So again, we keep framing the growth for developing countries based on commodities. I mean, I went to the UN recently. Developing countries, particularly LDCs, are exporting more commodities now than they did 30 years ago. We're more dependent on commodities. And you're seeing it in the Caribbean as well, especially with Guyana coming on board with its huge exports of oil and gas and fossil fuels. The Caribbean is now exporting more commodities now than they did 30 years ago. So where are the new growth opportunities? The diasporic economy. Sebastian mentioned that remittances outstrips FDI and ODA and other areas. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I've done work in Jamaica where the diasporic economy, beyond remittances, which is about 15–16% of GDP, can rise up to about 25% of GDP if you include diasporic exports from exporting bami and patties and rum and whatever to the diasporic markets, but also mortgages. Then there's opportunities in the diaspora bonds. Then there's the securitization of remittances. I mean, I could go down the list. We are not tapping into the diasporic economy in any strategic way in the Caribbean. My third area is what I call public policy. The big elephant in the room, well, there are 2 of them. 1, innovation governance. I come from Trinidad and Tobago, which is the only country in the region that is calculating and measuring its investment in research and development. It's 0.5% for the last 20–30 years. And in an oil and gas economy that has more than enough resources. So we've been underinvesting in innovation, and this underinvestment across the whole Caribbean is caught up with us. It means that our enterprises cannot compete. If you're not doing R&D of any sort, it means then you're relying on somebody else's technology, management capabilities, and how are you going to compete with those people if it is you are not investing in this? The last area I want to mention, which I think is really important, and a study done by the IDB several years ago, strategic government procurement. We talked about domestic resource mobilization earlier. If Caribbean governments, which are the largest users and consumers of domestic goods and services in the Caribbean, it's in excess of 20, 30, almost up to some cases 50% of GDP, were to introduce, for example, renewable technologies in all government buildings, rainwater capture, solar, wind, etc. Almost overnight, you create a renewable energy sector. And that's without needing resources from outside of the region. The last point I would make, though, is this. This is where the OECD, I think, plays a critical role. The OECD does work with countries in terms of helping them develop innovation strategy. They call production transformation policy reviews. I worked on the one for Dominican Republic, so thank you very much for that opportunity. And what is really critical about that is that it creates a roadmap for a sectoral approach, which I think is so important and so critical in the region. I know I've given you a mouthful, but I needed to just put it out there. My apologies.
Thank you very much. Sebastian, I think you have a lot of work for the next version of the Caribbean Dynamics. Okay, our third panelist is Brenda Wills, who has been the Commissioner of Canada to Barbados, Commissioner of Canada to Barbados in the Eastern Caribbean since August this year. She has extensive experience in trade policy and negotiations. From 2021 to 2024, she was Counselor and Senior Trade Commissioner in Singapore. So our question is, Canada has been an active partner in Caribbean development, particularly through initiatives focused on climate change adaptation, economic diversification, and data literacy. Can you share with us Canada's current engagement and priority areas of work with the Caribbean? And what do you identify as the region's top development priorities?
Thank you. Yes, but first, I think you recognize we've got my EU colleague with 9 years' experience and myself with hitting 3 months on Monday, so a little bit less. And yes, I have that trade policy, trade background, so I found the trade integration part of the presentations today very interesting. Also worked on the renegotiation of NAFTA, and so have an understanding of some challenges of trade. About Canada's engagement in the region, we have long history, strong people-to-people ties. There's 2 million Canadians that come to the region every year, and we have a diaspora of almost 1 million in Canada. So the ties are strong, and our partnership with the Caribbean is also underpinned by common economic interests, by common values, commitment for democracy, human rights. We also work very closely in regional and internet multilateral fora. Things like the UN, the OAS, and we also advocate for CARICOM at the G7, at the G20, and in international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF. So we're neighbors, we're in the same hemisphere, we're in the Americas, and we have a very close relationship. Last year, we, at the Canada CARICOM Summit, launched the Canada CARICOM Strategic Partnership, which elevates and formalizes our multifaceted relationship. And under that partnership, we're committed to joint action on shared priorities, including climate resilience, building sustainable economies, enhancing multilateral cooperation, and bolstering hemispheric security. And probably none of what I'm going to say is going to be surprising because we have heard from a lot of speakers already, but in terms of challenges and development opportunities in the region, the Caribbean as a group of small island developing states is highly vulnerable to natural hazards and climate-related shocks. This isn't news to anybody, but Canada recognizes these unique challenges and is committed to supporting the region in building resilience and adapting to climate impacts, including disaster preparedness. And as outlined in the Caribbean Development Dynamics 2025, we believe that despite challenges like climate vulnerability, limited financing, and connectivity issues, the region holds immense potential for sustainable development. And by working together, as my EU colleague said, we can unlock that potential. And we're leveraging various tools to that end. Broadly, our international assistance programs prioritize climate resilience, economic growth, inclusive governance, with gender equality at the core, in line with Canada's feminist international assistance policy. Canada is also committed to building inclusive and sustainable economies, recognizing that economic growth and green growth must go hand in hand. And today, as in the past, the Caribbean is one of Canada's most important international assistance partners. We're proud to work with a broad range of local, regional, and international partners to strengthen climate resilient agriculture, vocational training, we did talk about education earlier, and competitive businesses in the Caribbean. So these efforts will help to unlock the region's development potential, but it's not without challenges. Sustainable development's not without challenges. And in my 3 months here, 2 challenges have been systematically flagged, and they were already mentioned today, so it's not novel or original, but capacity being one. Limited human and institutional capacity remain a barrier to major infrastructure and development efforts. While Canada supports capacity development through several initiatives, this is an area requiring deeper focus. And second, scale. We heard that from Minister Straughn as well. The small size of many Caribbean countries makes attracting investment difficult. Regional collaboration offers a potential solution, but past efforts have faced hurdles. So I think, and we heard this earlier, that the Caribbean Development Dynamics 2025 creates a platform for honest conversations with data, with evidence that hopefully will lead to collaboration that inspires innovative responses. So in terms of looking forward from Canada's perspective, we are committed to continued engagement with the region, to listen, to collaborate, and address these shared challenges. And the Canada-CARICOM strategic partnerships provided crucial momentum for strengthening our ties at all levels. And I believe we're focusing on the right areas, including climate resilience, renewable energy, inclusive policies, and economic growth. But addressing capacity and scale is essential to fully unlocking the Caribbean's development potential. So I'll end by saying Canada stands ready to continue working alongside you in light of the findings of the Caribbean Development Dynamics, and to ensure the region's sustainable development is inclusive, resilient, and prosperous for all.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. And our final panelist is online, Cristina Pérez, who is the ambassador of Spain to Trinidad and Tobago. The embassy in Port of Spain is also accredited to other countries in the Caribbean, as well as to regional organizations such as CARICOM, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and the Association of Caribbean States. And my question to you is, Spain has been a significant partner in Caribbean development, engaging both bilaterally and through regional initiatives. Can you elaborate on Spain's primary priorities in its engagement with the Caribbean? And what role do you see Spain playing in mobilizing financing for key development initiatives in the region, particularly ahead of the Financing for Development conference that you'll be hosting in Seville in 2025?
Hello, good afternoon, and my greetings from Sweet T&T. I am very happy to be here with you, and if you allow me, before answering to your very interesting question, I would like to make 2 remarks concerning that are linked to the fact that we are a member state of OECD and also an active member of the Center of Development of the OECD. So I would like to express our sincere satisfaction to be today here in Barbados having this conversation. And I think that this is a proof that the region is more integrated, not only in the works of the OECD, but also in the Development Centre. Because on the last days, as the director has mentioned before, The Center of Development has enlarged and enriched itself with the admission of two members from the Caribbean, Dominican Republic, some time ago, and now Barbados. I think this is something very interesting because it ensures to have a view of the Caribbean in the works of the Center of Development that is considered to be, as at least by us, a privileged platform for exchange of experience. On the other hand, also I would like to underline the importance of the launching of the report, the Caribbean Development Dynamics today, because we think that is vital for two things. First of all, because it's a new working tool that is putting into place, which is very interesting. But the second thing is that it is a resource for accessing to data of immense value that is going to be crucial to shape, inform, and more efficient public policies, and contributing to make reality one of the motto of OECD, which is better policies for better lives. And well, once I have made these two remarks, I would like to say that we have a long-standing relationship with the Caribbean. It is true that it's particularly strong with the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, but also it's very significant with the rest of the region. And we have been working for a long time, and this has as a result an important presence in the region through 5 residence embassies. We have also an active role in the international financial organization, most of the most important ones that are financing the Caribbean, and also we participate on all the regional organizations. On bilateral basis, we have been investment in better approach to the Caribbean. We have appointed an ambassador at large, but also we have been working on a regional and multilateral level to use our political capital to try to put the eyes of these organizations, the views of the Caribbean. We can, for instance, with the CARICOM, we have established a more strategic relation. We have celebrated some months ago in July the 4th Mixed Commission with the CARICOM, and we are planning to present a joint working plan. And also, for instance, during our presidency of the European Union, we have paid special attention not only to the Latin American region, but also to the Caribbean with the results that the ambassador of the European Union has already mentioned. I would like to say also that with the Caribbean, beyond this, the historical and the emotional or the development or even economic ties that bind us, we share with them shared values, common interests, and also a strong alignment on various issues. Among these issues is the commitment to address sustainable development in a comprehensive manner with the unique and special context of the Caribbean. This is going to be very important in order to fulfill one of the responsibilities that Spain has had the honor to have, which is to host a very important conference, the 4th International Conference for Development for Financing for Development, that is going to take place in Sevilla from the 30th of June to the 3rd of July. And I think it's going to be an important date, and we would like to make our best in order to make our best of this conference. We would like to go to this conference hand in hand with the international community, as well, it's an international conference, of course, and we have some days ago celebrated a PrepCom in New York. We want to maintain an agenda with a lot of high aspirations, but we need to work together with the Caribbean. The participation of the Caribbean is crucial for us in 3 main areas. First of all, to guarantee the largest Caribbean participation at the appropriate level. Secondly, to lead some of the discussions. And thirdly, to take the ownership of this. Some of the topics that are going to be discussed in the conference are topics that the Caribbean has been defending within the international arena for a long time. Some of them are gathered somehow in the Bridgetown initiative, but others are traditional positions of the Caribbean. We are going to talk about the multidimensional approach to development, where all the discussions concerning Beyond ODA and the cooperations with countries in transitions are going to be of the utmost importance. We are going also to deal with climate finance, debt sustainability and debt management, the discussions about the renewed international financial architecture, how we can deal with that, how we can make it the best of it. And the Sevilla conference must be a milestone in redefining how we can finance together the sustainable development. So this is the message that I want to send. Caribbean has an important role to play in this conference, and we are expecting you to play this role in the conference.
Thank you very much. Sebastian, I think we're out of time. Yeah, so we're out of time, so I want to thank my panelists for this very, in some cases, provocative, interesting, and informative session. And we hope that this publication will become a standard that we can look forward to each year. Thank you.
Thanks so very much to our panelists. So as we will now fast forward to our final remarks, I will ask the distinguished speakers to come. I don't know if you want to deliver the final remarks via panel or if you wish to come to the podium. But we'll invite Ragnheiður Árnadóttir, the director of OECD Development Centre, as well as Anton Edmunds, the general manager of the country department Caribbean IDB, and Chad Blackman, the minister in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment in Barbados, to deliver the final remarks, charting the way forward. Do you guys want to come up to the podium, or do you want to deliver as a panel? I'll let you.
I always have to do this each time. Could you assist, please? Thank you. Okay. Good evening to all of you. I have the unenviable task of standing before you at the end of today and your weekend, and therefore, please forgive me. But the consolation is that we're some few hundred yards away from Oistins, and we all know what happens in Oistins on a Friday night, so please bear with me as I have to deliver this for you. But suffice it to say, let me first thank the IDB and the OECD for putting on this very timely session. Of course, this evening's interaction, really, listening this afternoon, provided a perfect canvas in my mind on a number of things: cooperation, development, potential, and I use that word very cautiously on potential because we use it as a buzzword, but invariably it needs to be one that allows us to reflect and pivot, moving things from potential into shared deliverables and realities. And therefore, it's my pleasure to give the concluding remarks, certainly on behalf of the government. And I want to thank my colleague, Minister Straughn, for his previous intervention. But equally, at the launch of this Caribbean Development Dynamics 2024 report, certainly the flagship document produced by the Development Centre of the OECD, as well as the IDB, is the continuation of a long-standing relationship with the Caribbean region over the years. And therefore, your commitment and support, as well as your interventions, are not only commended, but welcomed and appreciated. And therefore, as we chart a new thrust of Caribbean development, we must therefore now look to the future to see how can we unpack this into a way that we've not done before. Now, there's no secret that this region has been plagued by a number of systemic challenges, whether it be limited size, limited fiscal space, policy space. But the question is, how do we turn these things into a story of growth and opportunity? And the idea of partnership, to my mind, unlocks that and must serve as the springboard going forward. And therefore, when you look at the report, and I really want to commend you for it, it really speaks about strengthening our cohesion, particularly in the strengthening of the institutions. Our institutions are very strong, but of course we need to improve on them. But as we collaborate, particularly in the multilateral system, and the Prime Minister made it clear yesterday in her bilateral with the President of the IDB, we have the IDB, you have the World Bank, you have the IMF, you have CAF, working for the same constituent, the governments and the people of the Caribbean. But each time, it takes resources for us, for example, internally as a government, to have to deploy to do the same things invariably. And that coordinated approach, and I think Minister Straughn actually described it this afternoon, a coordinated approach is going to be needed with a fine-tooth comb so that you can ensure that there's cohesion of strategy so as to ensure clear impact. And let me therefore take this opportunity to commend all of you, all of our development partners, also the EU and Canada, for working with us, not just in Barbados, but regionally, so as to treat to these things. But what does this mean, and what's the context? There's no doubt that we are on the context within the front line of the climate crisis. We're literally yards away from the beach. But this has presented, whilst it's beautiful to drive past and to look at, it also means a number of things for fishing communities, coastal communities, where at a moment's notice, you now have a potential threat to your livelihoods. And therefore, the report highlighting the call for early warning systems and the furtherance of that and investing in that is so critical, because that can mean the saving not just of lives, but of community, but also helping us to prepare in the advent of a natural disaster. So we must now move into a realm of resilience in a way that we've never contemplated before. As the Prime Minister constantly says at the onset of this year, certainly at the beginning of the financial year, never in our wildest dreams did we think that we would have to contend with a barrel on the 1st of July. And therefore, the budgetary needs had to shift because it's a priority. And that is the new reality, not just of Barbados, but of the Caribbean. And therefore, our nimbleness now has to move into high gear. And therefore, even though we're small, that smallness allows for you to be agile. It's like a cat, if I should use that term. A cat can do like this very quickly because he or she is small. And therefore, our smallness now must be part of our competitive advantage as a region, buttressed by the necessary institutional support, buttressed by the necessary international partnerships that you continue to give us, but equally homegrown solutions. And I take the point of the ambassador of the EU, Gosha, a lot of it also requires ownership by us in the region, ownership of process. Who better to understand the region's needs than the region itself? Now, of course, there are systems that have to be worked out with our development partners, but there are innovative ways of doing things. Look at the recent debt swap. A homegrown solution, working with our international partners, is a testament that the Caribbean has the intellectual muscle to do these things on a global scale. And let me pivot very briefly to scale. A number of the things that we do in the region are world class, but they oftentimes suffer from a lack of scale. And of course, when you look at investment, as we've heard, that continues to be a major problem. And therefore, the harmonization of approach across the region, instead of having 300,000 people surely from Barbados, you look therefore at 6 million if you add the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean. You then have critical mass, and this is where we need to go. Critical mass, not just in terms of investment, but you've heard it over and over relative to procurement. So pooled procurement is going to be the new order of the day. And therefore, and please, perhaps, can I have some of that water too? and for Minister Straughn, I think it was the perfect, and Edmund, let me say thank you, because I think it painted the perfect ad, if there ever was, for Barbados Water. The before and the after voice. No, I'm serious. Can I have some water for her? That wasn't a joke. I was actually serious. Can I have some, please? Thank you. But I'm not sure what it is around here. Where's Carina? Yeah. Maybe something in the IDB. I'm kidding. No. But seriously, we have to now seize the moment, and we must turn our challenges into opportunities. The government of Barbados is very focused and very clear in its mind on creating a knowledge-based economy here. And what does that mean? What does it look like? For a long time, post-independence, of course, Barbados has had what I call surplus certifications. You have persons who go from CXCs right up to doctorates. And it has worked for us well because we've had better jobs. But the economy and the economy of the future has to now be one that is anchored by intellectual rigor. And I was happy when Dr. Nerves talked about the intellectual capacity and intellectual property. Thank you very much. And here's a plug to Barbados Water. We have to now see the difference. Well, thank you, Edmund. I'm sure you and the Minister for Finance can work out some arrangement there. Huh? We have to now pivot and use our intellectual capacity and become the world's hub for solutions. And whilst that's Barbados' vision, to be a global hub for solutions and ideas, looking across the landscape, whether it's in climate, non-communicable diseases, and therefore turning global challenges into opportunities. This report, and I want to encourage other regional governments to look at the report and to use it as a basis for contemplation of a regional strategy for a Caribbean skills economy, but for the world. So not just to serve our interests, of course, we have to provide the platform for our domestic needs, but the Caribbean must become or maintain that zone of peace, of course, in a geopolitical context. But two, it must also be the anchor for the world's solutions going forward. And therefore, playing on our comparative advantage and competitive advantage must be key. And the role of the financial institutions and the academic institutions will be a major thing going forward. And simply just to say, as I said, I don't want to be too long this afternoon, we have to work a lot closer than we have before. We've done very well, we work closely together, but let's find innovative ways of not just working together, but also holding ourselves to account. This report, in my view, should serve as the basis for that, but let's find a mechanism to also monitor the impact of all the initiatives that we're doing, whether it's the CDB, the IDB, World Bank, you name it, IMF. Let us now take a step back and look at the Caribbean as a collective and see what is the tangible impact, what is the benchmarks that we're all committing to, and what is the timeline for delivery, so that the ownership and the test is not only if the governments are happy, but if the citizens and the residents of the countries have a tangible change of reality. That's really the test. That must be the litmus test of international cooperation and development. Are the people seeing the change in the positive direction? And I believe strongly that everyone here has that commitment and that vision. And perhaps in another 5 years, we can look back and see that there has been continued change in the upward trajectory in respect of these developments. So I just want to thank you very much and wish you all a fantastic evening. And as I said, 3 cheers for Barbados Water.
I almost want to ask for the water just before I start. I think this has been such a fantastic event. We're talking about very serious issues. We're talking about challenges, and we're talking about the lives of people. We're talking about how we can join forces together to do something about a lot of the issues that we are facing. But I don't think I've laughed so much in a serious conference ever. So there's something there's something in the air that I really like, that see, that we can learn from the Caribbean, because this is obviously the sort of in the DNA, to approach issues with a light heart and with a smile on your face, because we're going to get the job done. And also, what I find here, and I'm not going to try to summarize or give takeaways, because they have been done in every panel, takeaways, and now with the minister's intervention, I'm not even going to try to go there. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we are going, sort of practically with the report. But I also like the fact that we are tapping into this issue, I think, at a correct time. There has been a lot of preparation done in the region by you, by the countries, with the sort of emphasis on the importance of regional integration and everything that we have been talking about. And I am very happy to see that this report, which is a tool, and we will continue to in partnership with all of you, develop it further as a tool so it can be used to do what has been missing, according to the discussion here today, is the implementation, and to sort of get all the issues aligned. Coming from a very small country myself, a small island, Iceland. Now, with Barbados joining the Development Centre, you took the smallest state, smallest member state away from us. So you have to do something about the reproductive, what do you call it, the fertility rate. We want that back. No, I'm happy to share it with you. But small can be beautiful. Small can be strong. Small, another way of looking at it. If you are small with a small administration, you have a nimble administration. You have flexible. You have rapid reaction because the lines of communication are small, and you have the just do it attitude, which is also the island mentality. And I'm not just saying it because I am here in an island and I am from an island, because I have endless examples of that from my own country. When there is a crisis, the best way of reacting is quickly and with, as I said, short lines of communication. I can give you a very quick example of a challenge that became an opportunity and changed the Icelandic society. And that is something that we've been talking about here, renewable energy. And in the oil crisis in the 70s, Iceland was importing oil, and then simply when the oil prices shot up, couldn't afford it anymore. So we were so fortunate that we had policymakers at the time that just said, this is ridiculous. We are sitting on an untapped resource, which is the geothermal resource. We're sitting on it, and we haven't explored it. There were like pockets in the country here and there. And why wasn't it explored? Because it was costly and it was risky. And they said, okay, let's just find a way to go avoid these risks. So the government set up a fund, said to public and private sector, let's go out and explore geothermal energy. The cost was in drilling, and the drilling was risky. So they said, okay, we will lend you the money for drilling and exploring. It's not just drilling. This is a simplified version of the story. If you are successful, you pay back the loan. If you are not successful, the loan defaults on the state. Within 10 years, Iceland was fully or 90% we used it for house heating, and believe me, we need house heating, and also for electric production or production of electricity. So in 10 years, 90% of the country was heated with geothermal energy, hot water. The remaining 9.99 something, we're still working on the point something, is heated with electricity from hydro. What we didn't know then is all of the spillover or the sort of the value streams that were created that nobody foresaw. The engineers and the policymakers were just solving one problem. Well, one of the spillovers is the Blue Lagoon, which is our biggest tourist attraction, fighting a little bit of the natural elements right now because there are a lot of volcanic eruptions in the neighborhood. But they're fine. They're in the most recent one. Their parking lot went under lava, but they fix it. They've done like a bus channel, whatever. So you just have to. I mean, there are challenges, but you just have to look at it. And with the small, nimble administration, it's very, very big part of the success. So that was me being Icelandic. Now I'm going to be the director of the OECD Development Centre again, and I want to thank everyone who have spoken here and supported and recognized the work. And I also want to again thank the IDB for the fabulous collaboration. And the word partnership has been said. I think that's the word of the day. So I'm beginning to. The partnership, and I welcome you who are here and who are online as future partners of this report. What we are going to be doing, and one of the main sort of drive, we want to make or bring the Caribbean perspective to the global level. And I think that it is very important. That's why we're going to be presenting the report in numerous European cities. We're going to, of course, do it at the European Union and elsewhere to present this to our partners and colleagues. It's a demand-driven publication, so we will be talking to you about what are the topics of discussion, and I want you to pencil in a date because we will hold the Latin American Economic Forum, Latin America and the Caribbean, sorry, the LAC Forum that the Development Centre has every year with the IDB and the French Development Agency. We will have it now on the 2nd of June, back to back with the Ministerial Council meeting of the OECD. So pencil that day in because we're going to bring in stakeholders from public sector, academia, private sector, other IOs, all those partners and those partnerships that we were talking about. And so we will have a consultation there. We also, and this is the advertisement segment of my intervention, which is almost over, I also hope that more Caribbean countries consider joining the OECD Development Centre, because I think this is a momentum that we can ride on. We have had conversations, Keith, about Trinidad and Tobago. We might maybe continue that conversation. No, because it is important, the power of numbers. Now we have 2 members of the Caribbean, 2 countries as members, and the more you are, the bigger is the voice. And that is also regarding the smallness. We need to sort of group together with other small. So I think I will stop here, and I just can't thank you enough, all of you, and I look very much forward to taking this project further and to make sure that we make the voice of the Caribbean as loud and proud and funny as possible. Thank you.
So I'm going to be very brief, and I want to thank all of you for joining us here. I really want to thank Karina. Where is Karina? Karina. For your hospitality to all of our guests and to me whenever I show up in Barbados. It's tricky at times with my colleague reps. But to the honorable ministers, ambassadors, everyone else in the audience, to you, Ragnar, in terms of the partnership, look, the report says what it says. I think through all of the dialogues that we had, we know what it says, and we know we need to do a better job, and we know we can do a better job. And I think the fact that we have key partners here with us, CDB, Caribbean Export, CDF, and others, indicates a willingness by all of us to get our, I said it before, get our acts together, but to really and truly coalesce around delivering on the needs of our region, the needs of our people. So thank you, everyone, for joining us at the IDB, at your office, your home, and look forward to us continuing this dialogue later on. Thanks.